We have a great session with Professor Luisa from Uppsala University today, and just give me a few seconds to let her in. All right, here she is. Hi everyone, great to have you. Great. Hi Luisa.
Hi Nora, do you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Amazing to have you. So nice to see you. It's been a while.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to have you on board for this live. Great. I see that more and more people are joining. Hi, everyone. And so we're back with our lives. Every couple of weeks, we interview experts on the child gut microbiome and child gut health. So today we have Professor Luisa, and it's always hard to say your last name.
Good.
From Uppsala University, who is had also a background from Karolinska Institute, always worked in the microbiome field, and now working with bioinformatics and especially the child gut microbiome. And Luisa is our collaborator also in the PREVENT study. So we're very excited now to be collecting the last sample, so the third time point, and then soon we'll start also look at the data together, and we'll be working on this data for quite some years in the future. But Luisa, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your research now, also your work at Karolinska on the Swimami cohort. You did a lot of interesting things.
Yeah, so I started my work with microbiome really far away, looking at seawater. And it was good for a lot of reasons, but I wasn't very happy towards the end because I really wanted to change people's lives in a different way. So that's when I moved to Karolinska and started working more in the human microbiome. And at that point, they were setting up this large cohort called the Swimami study, so it's the Swedish maternal microbiome study, which was, I think, 5 years in recruitment or something, from start to finish. But yeah, now we're starting to see the results, so we can associate the microbiome of the pregnant mother to a lot of different outcomes, both on the mother's health, but also on the baby's initial health. And then, of course, as these children grow, then we can see if there are long-term effects. But so far, we only have the very early life events.
That's so interesting, and yeah, there's a lot of studies associated the mom's gut microbiome with children's health, with the child's health later in life. So that's extremely interesting, and this Swimami cohort is one of the largest studies in the world, which is here in Sweden, on this. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the results there. And now you're at Uppsala University and you have your own group.
Exactly.
What are your research interests at the moment?
So for sure, we're still working a lot with Swimami, with cardiometabolic complications, so high blood pressure, gestational diabetes, all these more serious complications of pregnancy. But I also have a PhD student that is looking more into the interaction between the gut and the brain. So we're looking at depression during and post-pregnancy. And I'm trying to expand more and more into other parts of the body. So the oral microbiome and the vaginal microbiome for sure. I think you can see a vulva there in the background.
Great, yes. Amazing. And basically the whole, let's say, high level, the concept here is that the gut microbiome is really emerging as something extremely important for our health. So the microbiome is a collection of microbes that we have in our gut. We have a microbiome also on other sites in the body. We have an oral microbiome in our mouth, vaginal, respiratory, skin microbiome. So it's all over us. It really seems that we're an organism made of our own cells and the microbes. Can you tell us a bit about that and about, in general, why is it so important? What does it do?
Yes. So in number of cells, we have slightly more microbe cells than human cells in our bodies. The microbe cells are really tiny, so they make up maybe 1 kilo or 2 of your body weight. But like in sheer number of cells, they outnumber us. And then since our cells are they all have the same DNA, and the bacteria can have, we have hundreds or thousands of species, each with their own little genome. So in terms of the things they can do, their gene functions, they could be doing 100 times more things than we do. And some of these things we've known for a long time. So a lot of the digestion of our food is not, we don't do it. The microbes do it in our gut. And of course, they're not doing it because they love us. They do it because it gives them energy to survive. But since these processes has been happening, since the dawn of time, the microbes were here before us. So everything in our body has evolved to have these microbes. And then, of course, if we think how we lived when we first started walking upright in the savannah, so we're small groups, we eat mostly raw food, we walk and sleep on the ground barefoot. So we were getting all these microbes on us. And because we weren't so many, we weren't getting so sick, because we mostly get sick when we're sneezing or just passing microbes to each other. It's not this like wider environment that makes us sick. But now that we live in very large cities with 1 million people, then we have to have a lot of hygiene, but that also means that we're missing out on this continuous inflow of new bacteria. And then all these systems in our bodies that have been selected over evolution to see these bacteria, they can go a bit crazy. So if you have an immune system that knows I'm going to see a lot of pathogens every day and I need to get rid of them, it suddenly doesn't see any pathogens. It just starts looking for things to do. So maybe I'm going to react to wheat, or maybe I'm going to react to pollen. So it just kind of loses control or loses focus in a way.
Exactly. You're touching upon a very important concept. More and more scientists are driving awareness to the fact that it seems that we're losing diversity in our microbiome because, as you say, we're not exposed to nature in the same way we were back in the days, you could say. So we are in cleaner and cleaner environments where there isn't this exchange of microbes. So it seems that we're losing diversity. Some scientists are associating this with chronic diseases. What's your opinion on that, and what do we know about that?
Yeah, I think it's a big part of it. And I mean, parts we can reverse with our lifestyle if we're going more into the woods, or if we have a pet that goes outside. All these things help us sample more diversity. But also a lot of the things we just inherit from our parents. So for instance, I know my mom wasn't breastfed and had a lot of antibiotics. So if she lost those bacteria, I don't have those bacteria, and I also don't give it to my children. So there is a sense in which it's hard to go back to the way it was. But what we can do in these studies is to try to really pinpoint what is the microbe that is missing, or maybe it is a combination, or there are different alternatives. But if we can find a few strong candidates, then we can also supplement specifically. So we can't make everybody live in a farm, but maybe in 20 years, we give so many drops to our kids when they're babies. There's the D vitamin drops, and there's the drops for the colic, and the drops for this and that. So maybe, when I have grandchildren, they'll be getting the live in a farm drops. Yeah. So their gut microbiome is fully developed. Exactly. But of course, it's really, really hard to really test these things. I mean, we're always going to do the best we can for the child that we have, so we can see all these associations. So we see that the children that have something or don't have something, they develop in a different way, but we're for sure not going to start, experimenting on children in the same way. That's just not going to happen.
Exactly. But that's exactly our vision also at Alba Health, because there's a number of things in our modern lifestyle that are disrupting our gut microbiome. At the same time, they're also beneficial, and they made us increase our health span and improve our lives in so many ways. So we talk about antibiotics a lot of times. Well, antibiotics save so many lives and made childbirth not a common cause of death, for example. So or C-section as well. All of these things saved lives and allowed us not to worry about dying from a cold, a common infection, childbirth, and everything. So huge advancements in our medical care and in our society. But then the kind of challenge that we face now is, but what do we do with this loss of microbes? And what we try to do at ALBA is to, first of all, raise awareness, educate people, kind of try to teach them and show them what they can do in their lifestyle to get this exposure from microbes. And also in the future, through our study, for example, the PREVENT study, try to pinpoint, as you say, are there some super bacteria that we could supplement to compensate for this loss? So we're super aligned with that. And that takes us actually to the concept of, now we know that the gut microbiome is important for everyone, but for children, it seems to be even more important. And there's two aspects of it. One, you talked about the transmission. So there's a transmission of microbes from generation to generation, especially from the mother, but also from the father. But also, could you tell us a bit about why is the microbiome even more important in the first years of life? Some talk about the first 1,000 days of life, but it's not really like a specific window. It's a bit more of a gradient, you could say. So what do we know about that, and why is it so important in kids?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, initially you were saying the microbiome was mature after 1 year, then we started saying 2 years, now we're starting to say 5 years. I've heard some people say until puberty. So, yeah, it's a slow process, but for sure, a lot is happening in the beginning. And everyone that has a baby sees that a lot is happening in the beginning. So, I mean, the brain is maturing very, very fast, but also the immune system is maturing very, very fast. I mean, these babies have been inside the womb, everything is nice, everything is 37 degrees, dark, some weird noises from the gut, but they like hearing that. And then they come out into the world and is just immediately overwhelmed, both by bacteria and by just impressions in the world, by being cold, by being light, by being hungry. It has never experienced these things before. So everything that happens there in the beginning has an important part. And by saying this, I don't want to mean that, if you happen to have a C-section, then it's, your child is ruined. That's definitely not the case, because it is still very plastic in the beginning. But as time goes on, as we're past 6 months, past 1 year, then the window of opportunity gets smaller and smaller. So it's those two main components. So it's how much the brain is developing, and we know that the brain and the gut talk all the time. It goes both ways. So if you're nervous, you run to the bathroom. But also, we know that our guts produce more serotonin than our brains. We have the vagus nerve connecting them. We know that we get small bacterial particles going from the gut to the blood and to the rest of the body. So that communication is super important. And then likewise for the immune system. So it starts with basically no conception of friend or foe. And they're protected in the beginning by our antibodies. So first they get it through the umbilical cord, and then they start getting it through the breast milk. But this tapers down, and they have to start making their own decisions, so to say. So the immune system needs to look at a structure and say, this is dangerous, I'm going to fight this, or this is fine, this is food, or this is just harmless. And if the training gets wrong there, this is very hard to change later in life.
Exactly. So that's very interesting, because the immune system seems to develop in this first year of life or even months of life, and the gut microbiome interacts with that. So it's very important in that time frame. Because of these relationships that you talked about, the gut microbiome in children has been associated both to common symptoms, but also to chronic diseases later in life. So let's try to break it down a bit. Mm-hmm. If we think about newborns, or maybe the first year of life, the gut microbiome has been associated to colic, with constipation, reflux, gastrointestinal symptoms. What do we know about that?
I don't think we know very much, actually. I mean, that's why your cohorts are so interesting. So, I mean, a lot of the studies, they are either looking at the very, very young babies, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, or then they jump into post-weaning. So we actually don't know a lot what's happening between 3 months and 9 months. And also these things are kind of circular. So of course, a constipated baby just because the stools are in the gut for a long time and bacteria are growing. So when they eventually come out, they're going to have a different bacterial profile. But so far, we don't really know the causes and consequences there.
We have some associations more than anything. So we have some associations between the gut microbiome and the symptoms.
Yeah. And then we know as well that the mode of feeding, so I mean, partially breast milk compared to formula, but also if you're breastfeeding, your food or some proteins from your diet also end up in the breast milk. And we know that some babies react very strongly to this, and then the mother has to cut out chocolate or milk or whatever, which is usually self-resolving, which is the good news. The bad news is that it can take 6 months, and 6 months of a child in pain is a really long time in the life of a parent. So yeah, no, at this point I can't really say, oh, it's this species or it's this genus. Yeah. I mean, there are for sure associations, but yeah, the causation is hard.
More to research. What about, there is one type of bacteria, Bifidobacteria, that has been associated to well-being. So for example, to the immune system, there has been studies also from Karolinska associating that to immune system development. What do we know about the role of Bifidobacteria?
So the Bifido are super interesting. So just for as a curiosity, they have this name because they're shaped kind of like a Y. So it's like Bifido because it's divided in two. So they look really special under the microscope. And the thing they have that is so special is that they're really, really good at breaking down sugars from the breast milk. So most of the sugars in the breast milk, they're completely not digestible for humans. So they work more as a kind of in quotes, a fiber. So it's something you're eating not because you're getting energy from it, but it's feeding your bacteria, and then your bacteria are going to interact with your health. And these bifidos are very good at keeping the balance in the immune system. So our immune system has two branches. There's one branch that is meant to deal with parasites, and when that goes wrong, it turns into allergies. And then we have one branch that is meant to deal with bacteria, and when that goes wrong, it turns into autoimmunity. So we're trying to keep this balance where neither side takes over, and the bifidos somehow really talk to the immune cells in a good way and keep this balance so we don't tip in either direction. And they're very, very sensitive to air. So there are also not bacteria you can get from the environment. So that's one bacteria that we have really good evidence that is passed from the mom to the baby, and mostly through breastfeeding, but maybe also in the birth canal.
Exactly. And because of this role in the immune system, they have been associated to, for example, reduce risk of allergy or atopic diseases. It's an association, but those are the, that's what we have. And I think, would you say that is probably one of the strongest things we know about the gut microbiome, the Bifidobacteria role and their connection to the immune system? What do you think?
Yeah, in this space with the infants for sure. And then there we can really say, so it's not all Bifido, so it's this particular species and even strain, the subspecies Infantis, and you can hear from the name Infantis that it comes from infants. So that's one of the most solid pieces of evidence so far. Yeah, for sure.
And one of the reasons why we believe it's also really promising is that there starts to be more and more supplements containing Bifidobacteria. Some of them even have studies showing that they give some health benefits. We don't have any that say they reverse disease or they prevent diseases, right? We're not there yet, like to be transparent or where we are. However, it seems like at least we have available tools to supplement. As you also talked about the sugars in the breast milk, so the human milk oligosaccharides,
exactly.
also called. And it also seems that we have more and more ways to supplement some of these HMOs, for example, in formula feeding. What do you think about that, and what do we know about them?
So I think that's a very good goal. Last time I checked, and to be fair, it was 5 or 6 years ago, and I had my first child. But those HMO supplemented formulas, they had maybe 4, or the very expensive ones had 8 different HMOs, which is much better than no HMOs, but it's also nowhere near the hundreds or the different HMOs. So yeah, I think it's a promising direction, but we're not quite there yet. So I think, the ideal scenario would be to have the HMOs and then maybe a freeze-dried version of the Bifido or maybe a few lactose, and really mix these things together. And then the formula would be equivalent to the breast milk in all ways. But I'm also not dismissing affordability, because just the process of drying cow's milk compared to all these additions is going to be very different. But for some children that come from families with high risk or otherwise at high risk, that could be beneficial. Not only for the family, but like from a economical perspective.
Exactly. And just for the people that are listening, that maybe this is a complex topic, I always try to make this metaphor of when we talk about bacteria, they're living organisms, right? So in our gut, they need to live and be fed. So it's a bit of, if you're trying to grow a plant, you need a seed, but you also need to water it. So you need to give it something to feed it. The same is for bacteria. If they're in the gut, you need the seed, so you need to transfer them from somewhere, but then you also need to feed them, and that's where these sugars, HMOs, or other types of fiber come in. So we always need to think about these two, and that's why sometimes it also seems that some probiotics that contain bifidobacteria, they don't seem to stay in the gut or work or give benefits if the HMOs are not supplemented. So at Alba, we always try to look at these two sides, right? The bacteria, but also what are we feeding the bacteria? And that's why we believe also diet is really important to make sure that the gut microbiome thrives. Good. So we talked about the bifidobacteria. Maybe another, and it seems like bifidobacteria have high bifidobacteria, especially in the first 6 months, first year, have been associated to lower risk of atopic diseases, but also colic. That was another association that actually Willem from our team found. The other thing that we know is that gut microbiome diversity seems to be beneficial, especially after weaning, once we start introducing foods. What do we know about that, and what is it? What is gut diversity, gut microbiome diversity?
Right. So diversity can mean a few different things. They all complement each other. So there's richness, which is how many different kinds of bacteria, how many different species are there. That's one component of diversity. But then it's also important to look at the evenness. So if you have one bacteria that is very dominating, and then you still have a number of species, but in really small amounts, then this is not as diverse as having semi-equal amounts of all things. So if you imagine the pizza, you would rather cut the pizza in 8 parts than like take half for yourself and the family shares the remaining half. So it's the same thing in the gut. We want to have this even and rich diversity of microbes. And it's a very general rule of thumb in humans, in the gut, we want a high diversity. And there are some caveats to that. So for instance, for the babies, as soon as they're newborns, the best thing is if they only have a lot of lactobacillus and then increasingly the bifidos. So that's the signature of having been vaginally born, breastfed, no antibiotics, no medications. This is the profile you're going to see. And this is the profile that is then connected to lowest risk of everything really, of asthma, of excessive weight gain, even things like autism and ADHD. And we don't know the pathway for all these things, but in terms of association, so that's what we want. So in the beginning of life, you have a somewhat controlled microbiome. So what happens when you have an infant that maybe does need a lot of medication in the beginning, that for one maybe has to go direct to the neonatal ICU, they're still going to get colonized by bacteria, but it's going to get colonized by everything that's around it, and that's going to be a lot of skin bacteria, because that's the dust we have in our houses. That's mostly dead skin. So in this early life, there you don't necessarily want a high richness in the beginning. But then for sure, when you reach 4, 6, 8 months and you're increasingly introducing solids, then two things are going to happen. One is that you're just introducing more substrates or more foodstuffs. So Nora made this really nice analogy with the seed and the water. I would phrase it slightly differently. It's maybe the seed and the fertilizer. And when you go to the fertilizer store, you'll see a fertilizer for fruits, fertilizer for flowers, fertilizer for leaves or whatever. So same thing here. So we have the breast milk is our fertilizer for bifidos, but then we want to move on from this stage and we want to get into a higher diversity and more bacteria that can digest like fibers and starches and proteins, so depending what you're eating. So there, the diversity should be increasing continuously until around 2 to 5 years somewhere. And then of course there are also events in life that will make the diversity drop. So if you need antibiotics, they're going to drop temporarily and they're going to recover. And if it's a simple thing like an earache and 3 days of antibiotics, the body still recovers quite well. But if you come to those situations where maybe a recurring ear infection and 8 bouts of antibiotics in a year, eventually the system doesn't recover. And then you get stuck in this other state with low diversity that then doesn't communicate with the immune system and the rest of the body in the best way. So that's also leads to further complications.
That's a fantastic overview from birth until later ages. And maybe another thing that we know is that gut microbiome diversity, which seems to be so important, it can be affected by diet, and especially it seems that it can be affected by the amount of fiber and the diversity and different types of fiber that we consume. What do we know about that? And are there ways we can affect our gut microbiome diversity?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about adults for a bit, and then we can see what's the same and what's different with the kids. So as you say, to have a wide variety of inputs, so a wide variety of foods coming in, that's also going to allow a bigger variety of microbes to thrive. So, I mean, there's the typical eat a colorful plate. And I mean, it's partly, honestly, it is aesthetics and it makes you feel good about eating, and maybe you eat more salad if it looks good. But it's also a practical way to assess. I mean, if it's red, it has lycopene, and if it's purple, it has, I forgot. And if it has green, it has chlorophyll. So the more colors you're eating, the more different types of fiber and just types of macromolecules you're putting in your body that are going to allow different microbes to survive, so they can occupy all these spaces. And there's a bit of an opportunity cost. I mean, when people that have a very low diversity diet, or maybe just eating meat and potatoes, when they eat beans, they're suddenly going to feel very bloated and have a lot of pain, because they don't have the microbes in their small gut that are breaking down this fiber. So everything is coming intact to the lower gut, and there is just fermenting and creating gas, and it's a big mess. So if you can establish this good dietary patterns from early age, then you're going to have a child that is capable of eating and digesting all sorts of things later in life. The only thing I wanted to caveat here is that kids' guts are much more sensitive to fiber than we are. So the reason we have the porridges that are special for children, partly is because they're fortified with iron and B12 and so on, but they also have low fiber, or they have the fiber compatible to the age of the child. So that's also why they have the porridge for 6 to 9 months and 9 to 12 and so on. So they also need to mature. And some children are going to mature faster than others. So just anecdotally, my oldest son wanted to eat the same porridge as the adults, and it was horrible for him. If you go to the doctor and they say you need to eat fiber for your gut transit, but it has to be appropriate. So if he was eating so much fiber, it was just total stop. So we went back to the 6-month porridge, even though he was 2 years, and then things went back to normal. So trust the science and trust the doctors, but also trust your parent instincts.
Yeah, exactly. I love this caveat because as you say, it's a maturation curve. You could say it's not like from the moment you introduce solids, there you are, the more fiber, the better. We talk a lot also at Alba. We have a lot of lives also with nutrition and health coaches, and we talked about fermented foods. And we always caveat, yes, fermented foods are helpful, important, a good exposure to microbes, but you cannot give large portions of fermented foods to a 7-month-old or to an 8-month-old. It needs to be appropriate. It needs to start with small tasters. You need to check for other ingredients as well. Everything is appropriate at a certain age, and then it needs to be a slow progression over time, because actually trying to force feed too much early on can actually be counterproductive. And that's why we work a lot, especially in our PREVENT study, but also at ALBA in general, with very narrow age ranges, because everything needs to be appropriate for the age. So that was really, really informative. So we talked about the Bifidobacteria, the gut diversity. Another question I had for you was, it seems like some bacteria could be pathobionts or pathogenic, potentially linked to symptoms. What do we know about them?
Yeah, so maybe just defining pathobiont. So it's a word built of two different words. So pathogen is anything that can cause disease, but in particular a microbe that can cause an infection. So that's the strict definition of pathogen. And then you have the symbionts, which are the bacteria that can live in harmony, so to say. Then a pathobiont are the things that are in between. So they're mostly harmless or maybe even beneficial, but under the wrong circumstances, for instance, after a bout of antibiotics, then they could start growing and become invasive. And that's still true. And that's going to be things like E. coli or certain Clostridia, but that's not the main thing maybe in early childhood, because we're not getting so much of these, or at least in urban, European, whatever settings, we don't see much gastroenteritis, so like real infection. But we can see some things that just grow a lot and then maybe tip the immune system or the neural system in a direction we don't like so much. Is there a particular species you were thinking of now, Nora?
Not particular species. I mean, there could be some Clostridium, some Klebsiellas as well that have been associated to symptoms. So there are some that we're looking at. There could be also some studies show that high Proteobacteria, especially if they're high compared to the Bifidobacteria, they have been associated to symptoms and also to chronic diseases later in life, especially this maybe relationship between the Bifidobacteria, so the beneficial ones, and some that, as you say, could be fine in small amounts, but if they're taking over the gut, could be associated to symptoms.
Yeah, so the Proteobacteria, and these include the E. coli, the Klebsiella, even the Salmonella, they're a special group because they can live in the gut and they can live without any oxygen, which is the case in the mature gut. So let's say from 6 months onward, then there's no oxygen left in the gut. And they can live there, but they can also live anywhere else, in your skin or in body surfaces. So they are these really opportunistic microbes. So they're not really the things that we selected for and that our intestinal mucus is adapted for, this long evolutionary history. They're just the things that take over when there's space left. So it could be that they're themselves a triggering disease because they can be invasive. So of course they will make our immune system nervous. They have a lot of markers on their surface that can trigger a response. It can also be that we're just seeing them because of the lack of everything else. So partly maybe they are a marker of we're missing the good stuff and that's why we see them. Or it could be that since they can become aggressive, then they have this pro-inflammatory profile.
Yeah, exactly. Great. I think we covered a few things that are a bit more known on the microbiome. So the diversity, the Bifidobacteria, potentially the pathobionts. You work a lot on the gut-brain axis, so the connection between the gut microbiome and brain. And you mentioned before the connection with autism and ADHD, which is now a very big topic for research. What do we know about that?
We know some things, and honestly, when I work with the gut-brain axis, it's more on mood symptoms, so more anxiety and depression. So I will talk about the neurodevelopmental disorders, but with a little pinch of salt. So we know for sure that these children typically have, lower diversity in early life. mean, we know for sure that early life antibiotics, C-section, and formula feeding are all risk factors for neurodevelopmental disorders. We can't say for sure that this goes through the gut microbiome. It's also, yeah, a lot of things are different. Of course, yeah, child that is born early and that the brain is even more immature and then is exposed to light and cold and all these things earlier. So probably the entire mechanism is not the gut, but part of it could be. And there are some good clinical studies supplementing children with ADHD or ADHD combined with autism with a combination of probiotics and fibers. So it's called a symbiotic when you have both the seed and the fertilizer. And it seems to improve symptoms. So, I mean, it's not a cure for autism, and I don't think we should be looking for one because it's a very interesting approach to life and something that really benefits, especially in university or work at. Honestly, half the people are somewhere on the spectrum. So we're not trying to get rid of that, but it can help all the things that are actually really hard for the children, the sense of getting overwhelmed. So they have, yeah, so they could show improvements in mood, in being able to take experiences with a pinch of salt and not go directly into full panic mode. So it seemed to be well accepted by both the parents and the children. And they also work a lot in making it palatable because a lot of autistic children have a real big problem with the texture of food. And that's something that confounded early studies because they were saying, oh, autistic children have lower gut diversity, but also they refuse to eat anything that is not boiled potatoes and cornflakes. And then, of course, they have low diversity. But it seems to be something that feeds each other. So it starts on a wrong path in the microbiome that leads to this aversion to foods and textures that then makes it harder to reset the gut microbiome. So those studies have really worked on making it very soluble. You can drink it. It doesn't get caught in your mouth. So those studies seem quite promising. And I mean, for all these things we're discussing, from asthma to, we're never going to cure anything on the gut, I don't think, but we can change the modulate the symptoms or make life better, make symptoms easier.
No, we really agree, and also we did a review especially about autism and ADHD, and we looked at the data, and it really seemed as you say that working with the gut microbiome diversity and in general gut microbiome could help with symptoms and especially behavior in children. But there's no evidence that we can, cure the disease, and it's probably more multifactorial and it involves many different factors. But the fact that we could help with behavior and with symptoms and help these children kind of with their life experience, that could be very promising, of course.
Exactly.
What about, there's also a link to weight and to obesity. So what do we know about that?
Yeah, so that's a super interesting one because I don't think the mechanisms are fully understood, but it's the same time one of the things we've known for longer. So it is forbidden in Europe, and I'm not sure it's still in the United States or not. But for a long time, farmers just kept cattle and pigs on low doses of antibiotics because this makes them gain more weight. And it goes kind of against what we would think. So if we need our gut microbiome to break down foodstuffs so we can absorb them, why is it that decreasing the microbial load will make us gain more weight? I think part of the explanation is that the bacteria are also using energy. So you keep just enough bacteria that they can break down the food, but not that many that they're also using the energy. So all the energy is just going in all the time. And this was also one of the first clear things that could be shown in humans. So there was a very nice study by Peter Turnbaum, maybe 2009 even. So he had adult twins, identical twins, where one twin was lean and one twin was obese. And there they could show very clearly that given the same genetics, the same risk factors, the same everything, the obese twin would have a much lower gut diversity. And there we also know it's causal. So you could also think, okay, but maybe these people are just eating junk food, and junk food makes you gain weight and it's also bad for your microbiome. But we also know that if you feed mice, and I'm going to go back to the story, but actually humans as well, the fecal matter of an obese person, without changing their exercise or their diet, the animals that receive this obese microbiome, they start gaining weight as well, and gaining fat in particular.
Exactly.
And we know this works in humans as well, because there's one famous case where a woman needed a fecal transplant. So she had repeated infections with Clostridia, and this is the one infection or diagnosis where the only solution is the fecal matter transplant. And they decided to use her mother because it should be very compatible. They screened for known pathogens. Everything was fine. Except the mother was obese, and this woman that had never been obese in her life started gaining a lot of weight then after this transplant. So now it's actually an exclusion criteria. You cannot donate if you have a BMI above 30 or 35.
Exactly, and you touch on a very important topic. And also, if I can mention also another study by our collaborator Kopsek in Denmark, they took the gut microbiome and kind of feces from children that were born through C-section, and they transferred them to mice, and these mice gained a lot of weight and developed kind of the equivalent of obesity. And of course, mice are different than humans, so that's the caveat there. But then we could see that in animals, this causality effect was established. So that seems to be also the case then with C-section. And I think like the debate a lot on the microbiome is always about what is the causality. Can we prove causality? Can we prove that the microbiome is actually causing something? It's so difficult to study because it's so many things. There's so many bacteria. It's so complex. So it's very difficult to isolate exactly what is causing what. But that's one of the examples where we know that a certain gut microbiome could cause something like obesity and weight gain. What about pregnancy? So you work a lot on the gut microbiome during pregnancy, and you said that especially in the tsunami cohort, we see that the gut microbiome in pregnancy has an effect on the child later. What do we know about that?
Another few caveats. So I mean, the tsunami is based in Sweden, so I'm going to say should apply pretty much to your audience. It can be quite different in other resource settings. So I mean, Sweden is an extremely safe place to be pregnant and to give birth. We have a very low rate of serious pregnancy complications, but that's also partly why we're doing the study. So if you go to a setting where the mother simply don't have enough to eat, that is not surprising that a lot of them are giving birth early. They just cannot hold the pregnancy in the same way. So what we're doing in this study is saying, okay, given that everything is in place, you have the right to maternal leave, you have plenty of food, midwifery and so on, how much of what the complications that are left after everything else is accounted for can we explain with the gut microbiome? And so far, the clearest signs we're seeing are in relation to preterm birth. I can't say too much because the study isn't published. But but we can to some extent see which people are at high risk of preterm based on their gut microbiome, which ideally in the long run would lead to some kind of screening tool. So I mean, for now we know that the risk factors for giving birth preterm is if you yourself was preterm, if you have given preterm birth before, that's basically it. So it's just history, your personal history, your family history. But we could do much better if we had more ways of really testing who is who. And then, so we're looking at other topics, but it's still early days. So we seem to see some connection to children that are born very large for their gestational age. So far, I don't see anything on the babies that are born very small, which would be the other hypothesis, that maybe they're not getting the proper nutrition. So that I don't see any connection so far. But with the large babies, we're just starting. So we're seeing those patterns, as I say, with diversity, slightly increased, decreased. But we haven't gotten as far as trying to pinpoint the bacteria responsible. And I have also found that now just in relation to the mother, but this was a personal vendetta for me. As someone that has been pregnant twice, I could also associate the early gut microbiome to nausea and vomiting. So that's also a very neglected space in healthcare treatment.
Yeah, I was just saying that we had a question. I didn't see it before because it was in the chat. There was a question about the atopic diseases, so allergies and eczema, and the connection with the gut microbiome. And you touched upon before that the gut microbiome has an effect on this balance between the Th1, Th2 cells, so the balance of the immune system. What do we know about the association with asthma and with eczema, and especially like the gut microbiome early on to the later asthma and eczema?
Yeah, so I mean, first, I just want to be very clear that like the gut microbiome is not the only factor. It's always going to be an interaction between the microbiome, the genome, and the other exposures. So I mean, I was vaginally born, I was breastfed for a year. I still suffer every spring with the pollen. So no one should feel they're in debt with their children if for whatever reason they have allergies. But yeah, so we do have this window where we can kind of tip the immunity one way or another. So I mean, everyone is born with a certain propensity for developing allergies or inflammation, but we can tip the scales one way or the other, both through the diversity of the microbiome itself, so that early life controlled microbiome with a lot of bifido, a lot of lactobacilli, few proteobacteria, and then slowly during weaning, the introduction of more firmicutes, more the strict anaerobic bacteria.
Yeah, and
but
about
yeah, and the foodstuffs themselves, sorry, just to complete. So it's not only about the bacteria that are there, but there's also a window for learning that things that pass through your mouth and reach your gut, this is something you should consider food and therefore not react to. So that's one reason it's super, super important to keep the skin of the baby well hydrated, because if their first contact with pollen or with peanuts goes through the skin and not through the gut, then the body's going to think this is an attack. And we want things to give this, it's called the oral tolerance. So it came through my mouth and therefore it's okay.
Exactly. And so we had a question here, and thank you, Linda. And she was asking, would a fecal transplantation in theory heal allergies? That's a logical question. What do you think, Luisa?
I don't think so, because once you have the allergic symptoms, then you already have the B and the T cells that are reacting to these structures. So it could potentially prevent from developing more allergies, but I think it would be hard to really remove the allergen. But then we do have other treatments like the self-vaccination, where you introduce really tiny amounts of the allergen so the body can slowly learn that this is not actually an infection.
And maybe just to touch upon about my personal story, because I started Alba Health because I had very severe eczema on my entire body. And I actually managed to control my eczema symptoms extremely well now. One of the things I learned was that I tested my gut microbiome. I have extremely low diversity. Now I have extremely high diversity and I don't have the symptoms. So of course I cannot say that that was what's helping me, but it could make sense. So I do think that when you have eczema and allergies, even as an adult, there are things you can do to reduce your symptoms, especially for eczema, which is very connected to inflammation. But one of the reasons why I started Alba was that I realized I have a lot of food allergies. Can I reverse them? And like, why do I have them? And then I realized that, of course, you have your own predispositions, but it really seems that in the first months or year of life, you're really setting up your immune system. So it seems that in that 1 year of life, perhaps we could do something in that window of time to prevent allergies. So I cannot go back in time, but if I can help people know about this and know for their child, or, you know, if I had a child, I would probably also look into this. Then I thought that is like the promising time in the first year of life, because we set up our immune system, we could act in that time. What do you think about this, Luisa? Of course, it's a hypothesis and it's an idea. What do you think?
No, exactly. So I both agree with you in both accounts. So for sure, I do believe you can alleviate symptoms, of atopy, dermatitis, and also rhinosinusitis. You can for sure improve or worsen your symptoms with your diet. So it's not going to remove the allergy, in the sense that if you have an allergy to peanuts, you can never eat peanuts and that's it. But you can definitely have a much slower, maybe it doesn't hurt you to touch the peanuts anymore. So you can modulate symptom severity. And for this early childhood window, for sure. So I started working in pregnancy and women's health around the time I got pregnant for the first time. So it was also very interesting to observe from both sides. And then, when my kids were small, they were, as kids do, putting things in their mouth and eating sand. And I was basically looking away saying, I didn't see it, and it's good for their gut microbiome. We're in Sweden, there's no parasites, it's fine. So as I say, we do what we can to improve their health. And my approach was very blunt, because we don't really have the knowledge. We only know that, sampling the world and exposing to a natural lifestyle is beneficial. But it would have been very nice to know more, to say, okay, I'm going to introduce these foods in this order, or maybe I'm going to supplement, when I introduce this food, I can supplement with this bacterium. That would have been amazing knowledge to have.
Yeah.
And so far, none of my sons have inherited my allergies, so I'm optimistic.
Exactly. We hear a lot about those stories as well. And to go back to Linda's question, so the hypothesis here is that in the first years of life, couple of years, there are things that you can do, and even without going to the fecal microbiome transplant, but even through diet, maybe supplements, probiotic supplements, there is good reasons to believe that there are things that can be done, at least to reduce the risk or to reduce those symptoms. And we had quite a lot of lives, and we're going to come up with more, because we really want to touch upon kind of the more allergic diseases. So thanks a lot for these questions. This is one of the reasons why we started this, and also why we started the PREVENT study in Sweden, where we're looking exactly into the symptoms. And there's also another question about do preservatives in child food have an impact on the gut microbiome?
I'm going to give a yes and no on that. So at a broad level, for sure, preservatives, colors, all these additives, anything you put in your gut, some microbe is either going to die from it or thrive from it. So they will make a difference. And preservatives in particular, the reason they are preservatives is because they keep things from growing. And it can be very basic things. You can use just, what do you call it, the acid that's in the lemons. Citric acid is a preservative. That's not going to be harmful in any way. This is just lemon juice in a concentrated form. But generally we want to keep the amount of things that are synthesized in a lab, where we don't necessarily have natural bacteria that can break them down. Those things we want to keep it low. Then, to be fair, the legislation in food, in child products in the EU and Sweden is quite good. So, if you buy the ready-made puree and you look at the composition, it's usually just potato or just carrot, and it's just boiled and vacuum sealed, and that's what keeping the bacteria from growing. So yes, additives and preservatives could alter your gut microbiome, also your skin microbiome. But typically the amounts we expose here in Northern Europe are not worrying.
Exactly. And also, if we are to prioritize what's kind of to be avoided, because of course, and I also don't want to cause anxiety into people, because the thing is that we live in the world we live in, and we're exposed to so many compounds, so many things that are artificial, and that's the life we live. We shouldn't be stressed about it, right? There's a lot of benefits to that, and there's a lot of things that maybe are suboptimal. Of all the things we are exposed to, or that children are exposed to, what would you say, Luisa, maybe are the ones that affect the most negatively the gut microbiome?
I mean, medications for sure, but I mean, medication we take when we need to. So just to keep this in mind, just, if you need a medication, you should take it. But the benefit should be bigger than the harm. And I think as parents, we get really frustrated in Sweden because we don't get antibiotics very often for a strep throat or an earache. And we're like, well, but my child is in pain and you're giving me nothing. But there's a good reason we're not being given something. So it's really the cost benefit analysis, and Sweden errs from the side of caution. But then other than medication, artificial sweeteners are a big no. I mean, unless your child is diabetic, there's no need for that. Children burn sugar very fast, and we adults shouldn't be using artificial sweeteners either. We should just be eating less sugar. Yeah, and in general, I'm quite careful with the kind of cleaning products. So we don't want your house to be too sterile.
And maybe sugar itself as well.
Yeah, for sure, sugar itself. Yeah, so
which is already kind of a bit of a given, because in Sweden also it's not recommended under 2 years. It seems to affect our health at all ages. But sugar, what do you think about fragrances?
I haven't really seen. I mean, for sure, if you are in any way sensitive, you're going to react in a strong way. I haven't read any scientific literature on that. But yeah,
there are some associations.
Maybe avoid just everything that is unnecessary.
Exactly. There are some associations with allergy and other conditions. I think in general, also my point of view is, as you say, if not necessary and if it can be avoided, it's an additional kind of compound that could be avoided. I mean, if at all possible, because I think the limitation we have today is that the way we evaluate food products, pharmaceuticals, anything, we're used to evaluating them for our health, but we don't take the microbiome into account. So historically, even when we do clinical trials for pharmaceuticals, we don't have tests to evaluate is this safe for the microbiome. So inherently, if you buy any product that is, like, in theory approved, it hasn't been studied for safety on the microbiome. So my personal way to go about it is, if I can buy something cleaner with less ingredients, less of all of these things, I can, but to some extent I also cannot always buy something that has absolutely nothing. So it's always a balance, and it's really important not to get too stressed out, but to try to take the best alternative that you have in front of you. That's my personal way to go about it.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. You can only do what you do. So even, yeah, my mom was annoying me because I keep my food in plastic boxes, and in theory, plastics could have chemicals that leach into your food. And she said I should change everything for glass. And I commute an hour and a half with a backpack. I'm not going to be carrying glass boxes on my back during that time. Yeah, so you just have to make the choices that work for your life and for your family. If at the point you're so obsessed with the cleanliness that you're not spending time sitting on the floor playing cars, then it's an overshoot. Then it's time to come back, because the gut microbiome, and definitely the neural development and the immune development also benefit a lot from just parent-child interaction.
Exactly, as you say, and we shouldn't just optimize for the microbiome. We should optimize for our life, which is made by many things. And I have myself been into the loop of becoming overly cutting everything, being super stressed out about everything. I've been through that journey, and that eventually actually made my symptom get worse for a period of time, probably because stress also affects.
Exactly.
So worse things too much. So through my journey, I did go through that, and I did land on, you need to balance all of these things and understand that we live in the society we live in now. We cannot live in a farm and cook 3 hours a day with all the best products in season. So we need to balance all of these things. There's a question on, is artificial sugar worse than ordinary white sugar from a microbiome perspective?
Yeah, so I'm going to preface this by saying I am completely addicted to Diet Coke, but it is. So from a pure microbiome perspective, sugar is something that bacteria can tolerate. And of course, if you have a very high sugar intake, this is also something that feeds those pathobionts, so it's not something you want to indulge in. But yeah, some studies even suggest that at a very high level, so if you're say that you are drinking 2 liters of diet soda a day, which obviously shouldn't be doing, but then it starts having the same impact as a small dose of antibiotics.
And would you say that the artificial sweeteners are worse than the regular?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, not that I don't want to promote sugar consumption, but from a microbiome perspective, the artificial sugars are actually worse.
Do you know why? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, so I kind of know, but they seem to just inhibit the growth of certain things. I mean, there is also a very wide array of artificial sugars, and some of them work, like stevia, that is an actual plant compound, is probably quite okay. So it doesn't have any chemical bonds that are not found in nature. But so artificial sugars, they inhibit the growth of quite a few different bacterial species, and especially those very sensitive, strictly anaerobic species that we want to have in our gut, they don't like it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what we also saw. And artificial sweeteners sometimes are promoted as like better than sugar, but they have a lot of effects also on our blood sugar. So it's actually broader than that. No, but thanks so much for all the great questions. I actually forgot at the very beginning to say that we're open for questions and we answer everything live. I don't know how I forgot that. I usually say that because we love to get your questions, and it's also a way to to bring up the most interesting topics. I think we covered a lot here. We covered kind of the importance of the gut microbiome, the importance of it in childhood, but also what are the things that we know, what are the things that we don't know yet. So thank you so much, Luisa, for taking us through. You have a super impressive experience throughout all the early life microbiome, and we can't wait to start looking at the data from our PREVENT study. That will be very exciting. And thank you so much to everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye. Thanks, everyone.